the TNF experience with this, we were, from the journal side, very engaged with Altmetric very early on, and have been using the Altmetric donuts on our platform. The book's data has been a bit more recent, and we are integrating this onto some of our book platforms and engaging with authors with the data. So I wanted to kind of start by just talking a little bit about perhaps some of the assumptions and background and facts that we, and particularly I, made when we were kind of going through this journey of engaging with Altmetric for books. And I think the first pitfall is not necessarily a pitfall, but the first kind of area that we came with is assuming that authors are authors and they are agnostic between books and journals. That what applies for a journal article will equally apply for a book chapter. Whereas actually not all authors are book and journal authors. Not everyone who has published a book has also published journal articles. Not everyone who is publishing journal articles will engage with books. But also from a author perspective rather than a publisher perspective, these things are very different objects. They have very different goals for the author, and they have very different kind of feel in how you produce them and what you're doing with them. So there shouldn't be an automatic assumption that people will translate. We have Altmetrics for journals, therefore, we should really have Altmetric for books. This kind of automatic assumption of things moving between the two ecosystems shouldn't be taken for granted. We need to consider carefully how the different user groups between authors are going to behave. The next one is more of a kind of fact, I suppose, in the sense that no one publishes an academic monograph to get rich. But we still need to think about the reasons why people publish academic monographs or academic book chapters, and how best we can link the data that we have back into meeting these goals. So some of this is to do with recognition, wanting to advance the field, interesting, wanting to promulgate my interesting ideas out into the community. But linking these motivations for publishing back to the data that we have is a kind of effectively a key hook to help authors understand the value of the data and how it can be used. The other more general issue that we have within the books ecosystem as opposed to journals is the existing quality of data is worse. So from a TNF perspective, our books are distributed online by a number of third parties who are, to varying degrees, good or bad, at providing back data on things like usage for those ebooks, which means we can't give such a complete picture of how many people have downloaded a copy of a book or a chapter, how many people have read, have been engaging with this content online. Whereas the journals ecosystem, much more of this usage is centered onto a very small number of platforms, with the publisher platform often being at the center of this. We also, in books, the citation data is at best incomplete. Web of Science indexes fewer than 100,000 books. Scopus has more, but neither of these are covering anywhere near the breadth of, a percentage of the breadth of book output as they are for the journals landscape. And this means that a lot of authors don't have easy access to citation data around their books, and it's harder to find. Not least as well, citations for all arts and humanities subjects, whether that's in a journal or a book, do tend to take a long time to accrue, and therefore you don't get the same relevancy and speed of data that you do when you're looking at, say, articles published in the biomedical sciences, where citations and other data sources move much more quickly. So the ability to provide data historically around books has always been a little bit less than the quantity of data that authors expect around a journal article, or often will be able to find around a journal article. And I think we can't talk about metrics in any way, shape or form without some sort of reference to the impact agenda. REF and other assessment exercises are driving a demand for authors to be able to demonstrate their impact. But one thing, I think, particularly for those of us based in UK publishers or with UK dominated author lists, is always to bear in mind that in the UK we talk about REF an awful lot and about impact, but that's not always a universal thing. There are many areas of the world where the necessity to demonstrate impact is nowhere near as demanded as it is in the UK. There isn't this requirement to be able to say, well, not only did I publish this book, but this book was then used in these ways. The act of publication in itself is enough to justify the kind of the progression, the demand and the future growth in that career. The other issue that we have with altmetric attention with books is just there's an awful lot less of it. I had to remove Twitter from this chart because we have approximately 600,000 Twitter mentions to our journals as opposed to, I want to say, 100,000 Twitter mentions to our books. Admittedly, we publish fewer books, but there is, you can see, quite a much smaller number of events around books than there are around journals. So it is kind of a harder sell in some ways to go and say to people, go and look at your altmetric score, just because the numbers themselves are not as high as they are in the journals ecosystem. So particularly for authors who have come from a journal background, maybe put off by the lower score. So that's kind of some background about some of the assumptions that we made and some of the things that kind of come up in the process of looking at altmetrics for books. But what kind of things did we find? What kind of data do we have around this? So a little while ago, we did a survey of some of our books authors asking what's the most important thing that they want from a books publisher, and perhaps unsurprisingly, really as an author, what they want is someone who's going to answer their emails quickly and give them support and guidance and kind of make them feel cared for and engaged with. And actually these areas around both citation indexing and metrics are not seen as a key factor at the moment in choosing a publication venue, or at least for the authors that Taylor and Francis have been engaging with. But that isn't necessarily a surprising thing, particularly most authors are going to be kind of looking at unsurprisingly, at the things at the top of this list. But we still get some questions coming in from book authors, some of them relating to citations, a surprisingly large number going, why does my book not have an impact factor? Why isn't my textbook or non-kind of research book why has this not been included in Web of Science? Why has my great scholarship only been cited once? Given my book was published at least 6 months ago, why have I only got one citation? But we also get questions coming in about the altmetric data. And there is an interesting difference between some of the questions that we get from our journals and our journals and book authors with regards to this. So one theme that has come up with our book authors is issues around, I suppose, what can go from kind of walled garden content. So altmetric doesn't track private Facebook posts. It doesn't track LinkedIn data. So we get questions from books authors saying, well, I posted this copy, I linked my book on my private Facebook page, but it's not appeared on my score. Or people have been discussing my book in this private Facebook group. Why is this not reflected in my score? Whereas we don't tend to get so many of the same questions from journal authors, and our suspicion is this is more to do with how people share, particularly authors share work around their publication, that people are more likely to engage with a book on a private social media account, as opposed to journal content which is more shared on public forums and places like Twitter. The other thing we found, in my kind of vague attempt at trying to visually represent this, is look like Mickey Mouse's ears have fallen down, is we have a small subset of authors who, without any intervention on our part, really engage with Altmetric. They really engage with citations data, and they really love the data. They're proactive in wanting more. We have another subset of authors who entirely resent any form of measurement to do with academic output, and this is not universal to books. And then we have a much larger group in the middle who are agnostic to this. They don't know about Altmetric. They don't know that how this data can be used, and they're not familiar with how it can be engaged with within the community, or how they can engage with it with their university. So what did we kind of find does help with engaging more with Altmetric, encouraging authors to take this up? Clearly, one of the key things is don't assume that book authors will be aware of Altmetric from other places. Don't assume that they will think, well, because it's applied on my journal, it will apply on my book. And there is a kind of education piece around Altmetric for books, that because authors don't necessarily expect it to be there, they haven't considered the value that it can add to them. But particularly once the concept and the data has been shown to authors, they are keen and can quickly understand the value that this can bring to them, particularly in regions or areas where there is some form of impact agenda. So areas where we, particularly in the UK and Europe, where they have to go back and demonstrate more than just an output of publication, where people want to be able to see policy implications, Wikipedia citations, anything that can help them identify that narrative and that story around the impact. And the final thing, of course, is not all authors are going to love more data, particularly if that data doesn't reflect them in the light that their ego thinks it should be. So we do have had some negative reactions from people going, well, my Altmetric score isn't high enough, why are you displaying this? Or why are you displaying scores that are so low? And I think that's always a risk with effectively with any data that you have. That there's no one source that's going to make everyone look good, and effectively that's just a risk that we have to deal with. So translating this into tips, it's all kind of very self-explanatory, really. Don't assume what's worked in one area will apply to another. And be clear that, if there is less data available, in part because there are many fewer outputs around, don't necessarily write it off, because it is still very, very valuable. Authors, particularly those in the UK, are quick to engage, particularly if you can link it back to ref, impact, and other kind of career progression areas. And some authors will never engage, as we would expect. Some people will be downright hostile. And again, focus on the undecideds, focus on the people in the middle who will engage and can see the added value of this. And then I suppose that kind of final marketing piece of don't deluge people with data, kind of drip feed it to them, give them bits when they want, rather than trying to encourage everyone to take up with vast essays on why Altmetric is amazing. But the kind of final piece is from a non-marketing side, and I'm thinking more of this from editorial, and this is more based on anecdotes than data, is very much that being able to demonstrate that a book has been picked up by media or has been tracked in policy documents or is engaging with on Wikipedia or other data sources is really effective evidence to demonstrate the value of what the publisher has done. And this is an incredibly strong tool to help with encouraging authors to publish their next book or submit their next chapter with the publisher involved.